You believe you are conscious because you are awake. You open your eyes, you recognize your surroundings, you remember your name, your history, your responsibilities, and the people you love. But Carl Jung would have challenged that assumption. Being awake does not necessarily mean being conscious. A person can move through an entire life while remaining psychologically asleep. They can work, speak, fall in love, raise children, pursue success, and still have no real understanding of the forces controlling them from within. Because the mind you are aware of is only a small island. Beneath it lies an ocean of forgotten memories, denied emotions, ancient instincts, inherited symbols, hidden desires, and unrealized possibilities. Jung called this unseen territory the unconscious. And he believed that the purpose of life was not simply to become happier, richer, or more successful. The purpose was to become whole, to bring light into the parts of yourself that exist beyond your ordinary awareness. This process is called individuation. It is the gradual journey from unconscious existence towards psychological wholeness. But this journey does not happen all at once. It unfolds through layers. At each level, your understanding of yourself changes, your identity changes, your relationship with the world changes, and eventually the person you thought you were begins to dissolve. Today, we will explore 7 levels of consciousness through the psychology of Carl Jung. These are not rigid scientific stages, they are a psychological map, a way of understanding how consciousness can evolve from automatic existence to a deeper relationship with the self. And as you listen, do not ask only which level sounds most impressive. Ask yourself a more uncomfortable question. At which level are you living right now? Level 1. Unconscious existence. The first level is unconscious existence. This is not the same as being physically asleep. A person can be awake and still live unconsciously. At this level, life is driven almost entirely by instinct, conditioning, habit, and reaction. You do what you have always done. You repeat what you were taught. You accept the beliefs of your family, society, culture, and environment without examining them. You react to life rather than consciously participate in it. Someone criticizes you and anger immediately appears. Someone rejects you and you immediately feel worthless. Someone succeeds and envy rises before you understand why. Someone offers approval and you reshape yourself to receive more of it. At this level, you do not recognize these responses as psychological patterns. You assume they are reality. You say, I am angry because that person disrespected me. I am insecure because people do not appreciate me. I am unhappy because life is unfair. You do not yet see that the external event is only activating something that already exists inside you. Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is the defining condition of the first level. Your unconscious directs you, but because you cannot see it, you believe the world is responsible for everything you feel. You blame circumstances, you blame other people, you blame your childhood, your partner, your enemies, your bad luck, or the unfairness of life. And sometimes those things really have harmed you. But psychological awakening begins when you realize that your outer circumstances are not the only forces shaping your experience. Something inside you is also participating. At this first level, the ego is undeveloped. The ego in Jungian psychology is the center of conscious identity. It is the part of you that says, I, but when consciousness is still narrow, the ego cannot distinguish itself from its impulses. It believes every thought, it obeys every emotion, it follows every desire, it reacts to every fear. A person at this level may believe they are free, but most of their choices are repetitions. Their relationships repeat familiar wounds, their ambitions repeat inherited expectations, their fears repeat ancestral patterns. Their personality may simply be a collection of adaptations developed to survive. survive. And because these adaptations are unconscious, they feel natural. This is why some people repeat the same destructive relationship again and again, why they sabotage success when it becomes possible, why they continue seeking approval from people who will never give it, why they keep recreating the pain they claim to want to escape. They are not consciously choosing suffering, they are being guided by an invisible script. The first movement toward consciousness begins with interruption, a moment when the automatic pattern fails. A relationship ends, a career collapses, a betrayal occurs, a dream becomes disturbing, and anxiety appears that cannot be explained. The person begins to wonder, why does this keep happening to me? That question opens the first door, because the unconscious life ends when you stop asking only what happened and begin asking what within you participated in it. Level 2. The persona. The second level is identification with the persona. The persona is the social mask. It is the version of yourself you present to the world. You need a persona. Without one, society would be almost impossible to navigate. You behave differently at work than you do at home. You speak differently to a stranger than to someone you deeply trust. You adopt roles: teacher, parent, leader, employee, friend, partner. The problem begins when you forget that the role is only a role. At this level, a person becomes identified with the image they have built. They do not simply have a profession, they become the profession. They do not simply want to appear strong, they believe they must never show weakness. They do not simply enjoy being admired, they build their entire identity around admiration. The persona begins as protection. It often develops in childhood. Perhaps you learned that being quiet kept you safe, perhaps being successful earned affection, perhaps being funny prevented rejection, perhaps being helpful made you valuable, perhaps being emotionally distant protected you from disappointment. Over time, the adaptation becomes an identity. You forget that you created it. You begin to believe that it is you. At this level, consciousness has developed enough to function socially, but not enough to question the social self. You become highly aware of how others see you, but you remain unaware of who you are beneath their expectations. This creates a strange psychological emptiness. From the outside, your life may appear successful. You may be respected, productive, reliable, intelligent, spiritual, confident, yet privately you may feel unreal, because the person everyone knows is not the whole person. It is only the acceptable part. The persona hides anything that threatens the image. The strong person hides fear. The kind person hides resentment. The rational person hides chaos. The spiritual person hides desire. The successful person hides inadequacy. The independent person hides the need to be loved. The more rigid the persona becomes, the more energy is required to maintain it. You begin performing even when nobody is watching. You monitor your words, your appearance, your emotions, your reactions. You no longer ask, what is true? You ask, what must I appear to be? Jung warned that a person who completely identifies with the persona may become psychologically hollow. The external identity grows stronger while the inner life grows weaker. Eventually, the mask becomes a prison. The crisis at this level often begins when the persona stops working. The admired person experiences public failure. The strong person suffers a breakdown. The successful person achieves everything and feels nothing. The devoted partner realizes they have abandoned themselves. The spiritual seeker discovers rage, jealousy, or desire beneath their peaceful image. The collapse of the persona feels terrifying, but it is not always destruction. Sometimes it is liberation, because when the mask cracks, the hidden personality begins to emerge, and behind the persona waits the next level, the shadow. Level 3, the shadow. The third level is confrontation with the shadow. This is where the real psychological journey begins. The shadow contains the parts of yourself that your conscious identity refuses to accept. Everything you learned was unacceptable may be pushed into it. Anger, neediness, sexuality, ambition, jealousy, fear, sensitivity, aggression, creativity, power, Even joy can become part of the shadow if you learned that expressing happiness was dangerous. The shadow is not simply evil, it is the rejected life within you. It contains destructive impulses, but it also contains abandoned strength. A person who is taught never to be selfish may repress healthy self-interest. A person taught never to become angry may lose the ability to defend themselves. A person punished for creativity may bury their imagination. A person ridiculed for sensitivity may become emotionally numb. The shadow grows from everything you were forced to leave behind in order to belong. At this level, consciousness expands through discomfort. You begin noticing that the qualities you condemn most intensely in others often exist in some form within you. This is projection. Projection occurs when the mind places its unconscious contents onto another person. You do not see them as they are. You see them through the material you have not recognized in yourself. The arrogant person enrages you, the weak person disgusts you, the free person threatens you, the attractive person obsesses you, the successful person makes you feel strangely bitter. These reactions may contain information. Jung believed that what irritates us about others can lead us toward an understanding of ourselves. This does not mean that every criticism is projection. Some people truly behave badly. But when your emotional reaction is much larger than the situation, the shadow may be involved. The shadow does not only appear through hatred, it also appears through fascination. Sometimes the person you cannot stop thinking about carries qualities you have abandoned in yourself. Their confidence may represent your buried power, their freedom may reflect your repressed desires, their creativity may reveal your unlived life, their darkness may mirror impulses you are afraid to admit. At this level, relationships become psychological mirrors. You begin to understand that attraction and conflict are not always about the other person. They are also about what the other person awakens in you. Shadow work requires radical honesty, not self-hatred, not shame, honesty. You begin asking, what am I refusing to admit? What quality in this person produces such a strong reaction? What desire am I pretending not to have? What part of myself did I sacrifice to become acceptable? What am I capable of under the right conditions? This last question is especially difficult. Most people prefer to believe they are inherently good. They imagine cruelty, deception, betrayal, and corruption belong only to other people. But Jung understood that true morality begins when you recognize your capacity for darkness. A person who believes they are incapable of evil is not necessarily virtuous. They may simply be unconscious. When you recognize the shadow, you become less self-righteous, less naive, less easily manipulated. You stop dividing humanity into innocent people and monsters. You realize that both potentials exist within the human psyche, but integration does not mean acting out every impulse. It means becoming aware of it. The unconscious anger becomes the ability to establish boundaries. The unconscious ambition becomes purposeful action. The unconscious aggression becomes courage. The unconscious desire becomes vitality. The shadow's energy is transformed rather than denied. This is the first major expansion of consciousness. You are no longer only the person you wish to be. You begin accepting the person you actually are. But beyond the personal shadow lies a deeper layer, a realm that does not belong only to your biography, the collective unconscious. Level 4, the collective unconscious. At the fourth level, consciousness encounters something larger than the personal mind. Jung called it the collective unconscious. The personal unconscious contains forgotten experiences, repressed emotions, and individual memories. The collective unconscious contains patterns shared by humanity. Jung called these patterns archetypes: the mother, the father, the hero, the child, the trickster, the wise old man, the great mother, the devouring monster, death, rebirth, the journey into darkness, the return with wisdom. These images appear across cultures that had little or no contact with one another. They arise in myths, religions, fairy tales, dreams, art, visions, and modern stories. The archetypes are not fixed characters. They are deep organizing patterns within the psyche. They shape how human beings experience life. A person may believe they are living a completely individual story, but beneath the surface, they may be repeating an ancient psychological pattern. The abandoned child seeking acceptance, the hero leaving the familiar world, the ruler becoming corrupted by power, the lover mistaking possession for devotion, the seeker entering darkness to recover a hidden treasure. At this level, your life begins to feel symbolic. Events are no longer only events, they become part of a deeper psychological movement. A dream about a dark forest may represent entry into the unknown psyche. A dream about a house may symbolize the structure of the personality. A locked room may contain a rejected part of the self. A threatening animal may represent instinctual energy. A death in a dream may symbolize the end of an identity rather than literal death. Jung did not believe dreams should be interpreted using one rigid dictionary. A symbol must be understood through the dreamer's life, emotions, associations, and context. But he believed dreams compensate for the one-sided attitude of consciousness. When the ego becomes too confident, dreams may humiliate it. When the ego becomes hopeless, dreams may reveal hidden possibilities. When the persona becomes rigid, dreams may introduce forbidden characters. When the conscious mind refuses transformation, dreams may bring images of death, destruction, and rebirth. At this level, you begin listening to the psyche rather than trying to dominate it. You understand that the conscious ego is not the ruler of the entire mind. It is one participant in a much larger system. This realization can be humbling. You may discover that your private suffering connects you to ancient human experiences. Your fear of failure is not only personal, it belongs to the timeless struggle between the hero and defeat. Your fear of abandonment belongs to the archetype of the orphan. Your desire for transformation belongs to the death and rebirth pattern found throughout mythology. This does not make your experience less important, it makes it larger. You realize you are not suffering alone. Human beings have crossed these inner landscapes for thousands of years. The myths were not merely invented stories, they were maps of the psyche. At this level, consciousness expands beyond personal identity. You begin seeing your life as part of a deeper human drama. But this expansion creates another danger. The ego may become inflated. It may believe it has become chosen, enlightened, divine, or uniquely important. Jung warned that contact with archetypal forces can overwhelm the personality. The ego may mistake a universal image for personal greatness. A person encounters the hero archetype and believes they are humanity's savior. They encounter spiritual imagery and believe they have surpassed ordinary people. They experience synchronicity and assume the universe approves every decision they make. This is not individuation, it is inflation. The deeper you travel into the unconscious, the more humility you need. Because the next level requires you to encounter the inner opposite. Level 5, the anima and animus. The fifth level is the encounter with the anima or animus. Jung used these terms to describe the unconscious inner counterpart within the personality. In traditional Jungian language, the anima represented the unconscious feminine dimension in a man, while the animus represented the unconscious masculine dimension in a woman. Modern interpretations often approach these ideas more psychologically than literally. They can represent the inner qualities, energies, emotions, and capacities excluded from a person's conscious identity. The essential point is this: your conscious personality is incomplete. It develops by identifying with certain qualities and rejecting others. The rejected opposite does not disappear. It continues living in the unconscious. This hidden counterpart often appears through romantic projection. You meet someone and feel that they possess something magical. They seem to carry your missing soul. You cannot stop thinking about them. Their presence feels destined. Their rejection feels like psychological death. but sometimes the intensity does not come only from who they are. It comes from what you have projected onto them. They carry an image from your unconscious. They embody qualities that have not yet been developed within you. The emotionally disconnected person becomes obsessed with someone expressive and alive. The passive person idealizes someone decisive. The rigid person becomes fascinated by someone spontaneous. The person trapped in duty longs for someone free. The other person appears to contain the life you lost. This is why certain relationships feel larger than reality. You are not only meeting another human being, you are encountering part of your own unconscious through them. At first, this can feel like love, but projection creates impossible expectations. The other person must remain perfect. They must continue carrying your unlived potential. When they reveal their ordinary humanity, disappointment begins. You say, "You changed. You are not who I thought you were." But sometimes they did not change. The projection weakened. At this level, consciousness grows when you reclaim what you placed onto others. Instead of saying, "They are my source of life," you ask, "What quality in them is asking to be born in me?" Instead of saying, "Without them I am incomplete," you ask, "What part of myself have I abandoned?" Instead of endlessly pursuing the outer person, you turn inward toward the psychological image. This does not mean relationships are unreal. It means they become more real when projection decreases. You can finally see the other person as a person, not a savior, not a missing half, not a villain created by your wound, not a symbol carrying your entire destiny. At this stage, inner dialogue becomes possible. Reason begins listening to feeling. Strength learns vulnerability. Discipline learns receptivity. Independence learns intimacy. Action learns reflection. The divided personality begins moving toward inner union. But even this is not the final destination, because beyond the opposites of the personality lies the central archetype of wholeness, the self. Level 6, encounter with the self. The 6th level is the encounter with the self. In everyday language, people often use the word self to mean personality or identity, but Jung's concept of the self is much larger. The ego is the center of conscious awareness. The self is the center and totality of the entire psyche. It includes consciousness and the unconscious, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, personal identity and collective depth. The self is the organizing principle of psychological wholeness. It is often represented symbolically by circles, mandalas, sacred figures, stones, divine children, kings, queens, or images of union. At this level, the ego realizes that it is not the master of the psyche. It is part of something greater. This can feel like a psychological death. The identity you spent years protecting begins to lose its authority. Your social role no longer defines you. Your achievements no longer prove your worth. Your wounds no longer explain your entire existence. Your thoughts no longer appear to be the final truth. The ego does not disappear. It finds its proper place. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of spiritual and psychological development. The goal is not to destroy the ego. Without a functioning ego, you cannot navigate reality. The goal is to stop worshiping it. At this level, you begin sensing an inner direction that does not come from social approval. You feel called toward a life that may not impress others. You may abandon ambitions that once controlled you. You may stop performing an identity that has become lifeless. You may feel drawn toward creativity, solitude, service, truth, or a purpose you cannot fully explain. Jung sometimes described this movement as a vocation, not simply a career, an inner summons. The self communicates through dreams, symbols, conflicts, attractions, crises, and synchronistic experiences. It does not usually speak in direct commands. It speaks through patterns. A door repeatedly appears. A neglected desire returns. A dream refuses to leave you. A situation repeats until you respond differently. A false identity begins to collapse. The self does not promise comfort. It moves you toward wholeness. And wholeness often requires sacrifice. You may have to sacrifice the image others admire. You may have to disappoint people who benefited from your unconsciousness. You may have to leave environments that reward your false self. You may have to accept loneliness while a new identity forms. You may have to grieve the person you thought you were supposed to become. This stage often resembles descent. You may feel lost, but you are not necessarily lost. The old map may simply no longer apply. Jung believed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming who you are is not the same as doing whatever you want. It is accepting responsibility for the total personality. You no longer use the shadow as an excuse. You no longer blame projection for every conflict. You no longer hide behind the persona. You become accountable for what you know about yourself. At this level, inner contradictions begin to coexist. You can be strong and vulnerable, independent and connected, rational and intuitive, capable of darkness and committed to good. You stop demanding a simple identity. You become psychologically spacious enough to contain opposites. This is the beginning of wholeness. But there is still one final level. Not perfection, not permanent enlightenment, a deeper way of participating in life. Level 7, individuated consciousness. The 7th level is individuated consciousness. Individuation does not mean becoming superior to others. It means becoming undivided within yourself. The individuated person is not free from conflict, pain, fear, or uncertainty. They are free from the need to pretend those experiences do not exist. They no longer build their identity only from what society rewards. They no longer allow the shadow to operate completely in secret. They no longer confuse projections with reality. They no longer expect another person to complete them. They no longer treat the ego as the entire psyche. They live in relationship with the self. This relationship changes the way they experience life. They become less reactive because they recognize their inner patterns. They become less judgmental because they know their own capacity for darkness. They become less dependent on approval because the persona is no longer their only identity. They become more capable of love because they can see others with fewer projections. They become more creative because unconscious energy is no longer entirely repressed. They become more grounded because they no longer need to appear perfect. At this level, consciousness is not only awareness, it becomes responsibility. Once you see a pattern, you cannot honestly pretend it does not exist. Once you recognize your shadow, you must decide what to do with its energy. Once you recognize a projection, you must stop demanding that another person carry it for you. Once you hear the deeper call of the self, you must decide whether you will follow it. Individuation is not a destination reached once. It is a continuing relationship. The psyche keeps changing. New shadow material appears. New conflicts emerge. New identities must be released. The unconscious continues speaking. There is always more to integrate. That is why a truly conscious person does not claim to be fully conscious. They become increasingly aware of how much remains unknown. Their knowledge creates humility. They understand that the psyche is larger than the ego can comprehend. At this level, suffering also changes meaning. Pain is no longer viewed only as punishment. Sometimes it becomes information. A symptom may reveal an ignored conflict. An obsession may expose a projection. An emotional collapse may signal that the persona has become unsustainable. A recurring dream may point toward an unlived possibility. This does not mean all suffering should be romanticized. Some suffering is destructive and requires help, protection, treatment, or change. But psychological consciousness asks, what is this experience demanding that I understand? The individuated person does not escape life. They enter it more fully. They accept mortality, ambiguity, responsibility, love, loss, failure, transformation. They know that life cannot be controlled completely, but they can meet it with greater inner integrity. This is the paradox of individuation. The more deeply you become yourself, the more connected you become to humanity. Because beneath the persona, beneath the personal wounds, beneath the individual story, you encounter the same archetypal struggles that live in everyone. You recognize the frightened child in others because you met your own. You recognize the shadow in others because you stopped denying yours. You recognize the desire for wholeness in others because you have felt it moving through you. The individual does not disappear into the collective. They become uniquely themselves while recognizing their roots in the shared human psyche. This is consciousness at its deepest psychological level, not knowing everything, not escaping the world, not becoming flawless, but becoming capable of meeting reality without constantly fleeing from yourself. Conclusion. The 7 levels are not a ladder on which you permanently leave the lower stages behind. You may encounter all of them in a single day. You may react unconsciously in the morning, hide behind the persona in the afternoon, project your shadow onto someone in the evening, receive a message from the unconscious in a dream at night. Consciousness does not move in a straight line. It circles, returns, descends, expands. Jung believed psychological development often follows a spiral. You revisit the same themes, but from a deeper level of awareness. The unconscious life says, "This is simply who I am." The persona says, "This is who I must appear to be." The shadow says, "This is what I refuse to admit." The collective unconscious says, "My story is older than I imagined." The inner counterpart says, "What I seek outside also lives within me." The self says, "You are more than the identity you have constructed." Individuation says, "Now live what you have discovered." Perhaps the greatest mistake is believing consciousness means always feeling peaceful, positive, or certain. Sometimes becoming conscious is painful. You see the motives behind your kindness, the fear behind your ambition, the resentment behind your sacrifice, the dependency behind your love, the wound behind your strength. You lose the comfort of innocence, but you gain something more valuable: choice. You cannot choose what remains completely unconscious, but once you see it, a new possibility appears. You can continue repeating it, or you can relate to it differently. That is where freedom begins, not in controlling the entire world, but in no longer being completely controlled by the world within you. So ask yourself, which identity are you still protecting? Which emotion are you refusing to feel? Which person carries a projection you need to reclaim? Which pattern keeps repeating because you have not understood its message? And what part of you is trying to emerge even as the old version of you struggles to survive? The path toward consciousness does not lead away from who you are. It leads through everything you have denied, through the mask, through the shadow, through the dreams, through the ancient patterns, through the collapse of false identity, until slowly you encounter the deeper center that was guiding you all along. The self does not ask you to become perfect, it asks you to become whole. And the moment you stop running from what lives within you, your real awakening begins.